happy graduation. So I wanted to take advantage of being here and tell you a little bit about stuff that I'm just starting to work on and get ideas, feedback, thoughts on it. So let me start with the following. A little while ago, Mike Norton and I were wondering what people understand about income inequality in the US. So there's something called the Gini coefficient. If you took and you ordered people according to how wealthy they are, imagine that you have the bottom 20% are here, the next 20%, the next, I think there are 5 of them if you do 20%. And you drew how much wealth each of these 20% have. There's no more seats.
Could everybody move in toward the center and leave
chairs are all.
So imagine you divided populations into 20s, and you ask how much wealth of the total wealth, 100%, does each of those segments of the population have? So give me some guesses. How much do you think in the US does the top 20% own in terms of the wealth?
80%.
80%. 90. 40. Okay, so it's 84. 84%. 4. How much does the bottom 40% own? 5. 2. Okay. 0.3%. It's very little, just to be clear. Right? So this is what economists call the Gini coefficient. How unequal is the distribution of wealth? And the US basically looks like this. The Gini coefficient is very high. We are basically like China. We're worse than every other developed country, and we're kind of between us and South America, Europe and South America. You going already? That's it? We just mentioned something about China and you're leaving? Okay, so the first thing we wanted to find out was, do people realize after I do this once, nobody leaves afterward. The first thing we wanted to figure out is, do people understand the level of inequality in the US? So we took a sample, about 10,000 people, and we asked them to estimate how unequal the wealth is in the US. We said, if you had an empty plot and you had to guess all these numbers, what would you guess that there are in the US? And people dramatically underestimate. People think the wealthy have less, and in particular they think the poor have more. Right? So basically like everybody here. You didn't underestimate a lot here, but you dramatically overestimated. That's the first thing. People don't understand how much inequality we have. But the next thing we said, and what kind of inequality would you want? There was this very famous philosopher called John Rawls. And John Rawls said that a just society is a society that if you knew everything about it, you would be willing to enter it in a random place. Right? And it's really a beautiful definition. Right? If you're very rich, you want the rich to have money and the poor not. If you're very poor, you want more equal. What if you don't know where you will be allocated? We call this the veil of ignorance. So we asked people, we said, imagine the veil of ignorance. We didn't use this word, but imagine you could be randomly allocated to the low income or the high income. You don't know where you will find out. What kind of wealth distribution would there be that would make you want to join this society? And people's ideal wealth distribution was even more equal. Actually, to sum up, but it was even more equal. It was not perfectly equal. Of course, nobody wanted communism, but they wanted it to be more equal. So the Gini coefficient in the US is very high. People think it's less high. They want it less. But what was particularly interesting is when we broke these curves by Democrats and Republicans, the differences were actually quite small. So for example, we showed people two distributions of wealth. One was based on Sweden and one was based on the US. And we said, which one would you rather live in? 92% of Americans pick Sweden. how does it vary between Republicans and Democrats? For Democrats, it was 93%. For Republicans, it was 90.5%. So the differences were actually quite small. And people seem to be wanting much more equality than we have right now. So the question is, why aren't people on the street? If we're so interested in having more equality, why is it? So I want to tell you two things. One is, if Republicans and Democrats are really so similar in their basic approach about equality, why is the discourse so different? And I think it is partially because politicians are about obscuring our agreement and emphasizing our disagreements. But what else? Why do you think that people seem to wanting this high equality, or said they want to, but then in reality, people tolerate a lot of inequality? What do you think it is? Any speculations?
Well, I feel like in America, it's kind of part of a social norm that you get what you work for. So even people in the lowest bracket, a lot of them feel like I'll get what I work for. I have a chance to get out there.
That's right. So it turns out that when you get people to believe in more or less social mobility, their shape of what they think is ideal changed dramatically. Right? So if people believe in very, very high social mobility, they basically said, I'm willing to tolerate lots of inequality, because the people at the top are people who wanted to be at the top and worked very hard, and people at the bottom are people who chose to be at the bottom. Now in reality, social mobility is very, very hard to achieve. It's not that easy to achieve social mobility, but that's one of the reasons why people are willing to tolerate much more. This illusion of social mobility is helping this. Okay, now one of the big questions about inequality, of course, is taxes. Taxes are definitely going to be a major factor in the next election. Right? We have, as you've heard, we had tremendous debt. It's really hard to pay debt without increasing taxes. At some point, we'll have to do something to service this debt. And I think it's quite clear that taxes will be one of the main issues in the next election. And the basic questions about taxes is what? The people who oppose increasing taxes, what are they saying? What will happen if you increase taxes?
Less jobs.
Less jobs. What else? Less spending.
Firms don't innovate.
Firms don't innovate. People stop working. Right? Now, let's take a step back and let's think together about just incentives to work. Right? So the idea is you increase the marginal cost, you increase the marginal taxes, people stop working. Under what conditions will this be the case? That's the theory, right? The theory is there's a marginal cost of labor, there's a marginal cost of taxation, you value your leisure, people increase the taxes, you stop working. Under what conditions will this actually take place? When will it be the fact that if you increase taxes, people would stop working? Yeah?
The benefit they get not outweigh the cost.
Okay, so it's a benefit cost analysis. And so if you think about it, the model that people have of labor is a model in which labor is aversive. We hate working. Right? What do we want to do? We want to be in a beach drinking mojitos. Sadly, we can't do that, so we have to work. But work is unpleasant, but we have to work in order to get to the beach to drink mojitos. So if you increase my taxes, it will not be worthwhile for me. Right? I would say, oh, it's too much work even for a mojito, not worth it. Right? What else? What else does it have to be? So you have to hate your work. What else? What else would get you to stop working if the marginal tax rate went up? Yeah?
If you felt that there was an unequal spread of what the taxes were going to do, and people were taking advantage of it.
Okay. So you were averse to taxes. Right? That's, by the way, I think is a really interesting dilemma. The US, as far as I can tell, people here hate taxes, but it's the most generous country in terms of donations. Right? How does it work? Right? I mean, how come people hate taxes but give to charity all the time? And people give to charity all over the world, not just in the US. Right? It seems kind of puzzling, because if you thought about taxes as charity, you might even work harder to give more to charity, in the same way that we give to charity in general. Right? So you have to hate taxes in some important way, which, by the way, I think is really interesting why this happened. And the last thing you have to do is you have to not care about your social position. Imagine that you have a ranking order of all of you, and at some point you tax everybody. Everybody becomes poor. If you stop working, you would drop in your social ranking. But if you care about your relative position, it doesn't really matter. You'll keep on working because you want to maintain or maybe even increase your social position. So we started doing some experiments in very early days about what happens when we actually increase the marginal tax rate. So we do simple experiments. We bring people to the lab, and we pay them money to do some task, and we tax them. And what's interesting about the lab is we can bring people in, and some people we can pay them at the rate of, let's say, $1 per task. Some people we can pay at the rate of half $1 of task. And some people we can pay $1 per task, but we take half of it for taxes. So what do you think happens? Right? So we have people who make 50 cents, we have people who make $1, and we have the people who make $1, but it's divided by 2 because of taxes. Now, these two are physically the same, and these two people are making the same amount objectively before taxes. What do you think happens? First of all, do those people work more than these people? They do. More money in this task gets people to work more. By the way, it's important that we let people know that they were selected in these two things. We said some people get 50 cents, some people get $1, you got $1, which I think helps the effect. Okay, so these people work a little bit, these people work some more. What happened to these people? As you might expect, it basically deviates according to whether people hate taxes or love taxes. Now, in our case, the taxes go back to Duke. Presumably, it's a good thing for the students. They don't hate it as much, and then they work very much high. They work basically very close to as if what they're getting is the total amount. So, there's lots of more things to do on taxes, and we're just starting. But I think it's really interesting, and actually, I think it's very important. It's going to have huge social implication, and we know very little about it. If you go in the literature and you look at what we actually know about what happened to people's effort as a consequence of taxes, you will see that we know very little. In fact, we know very little about what motivates people to work. So I want to describe to you a thought experiment. Anybody here has ever climbed a mountain, like a difficult mountain? What did you climb?
I climbed
Mount
Mount Baldy in the White Mountains.
Baldy in the White Mountain. That's a difficult climb. What else? Anybody? So, if you read books of people who climb mountains, like Everest, K2, tough peaks, how do you think these books read? Do they read like a wonderful walk through the meadow with pleasurable view and enjoyable moments? No. They read as pure and complete and constant misery. Right? It is cold and difficult, and it's frostbite, and just misery after misery after misery. Many years ago, I climbed a little peak in the Himalayas, and my imagination was that when I get there, I would stop at the peak, and I would look around. I got to the peak, I got down as fast as I could. I thought my hands were so freezing, I didn't even want to take my camera out and take a picture. It was so miserable. I'll skip that thought. And if you took a utilitarian approach to work, what do you think would happen to people who got down from these mountains? What should they do? They should never climb again. They should say, my goodness, what a mistake. This was the worst thing I did in my life. It was terrible. From now on, I should spend my vacation sitting on a beach or watching Seinfeld or doing something pleasurable. Right? But that's not what people do. People keep on doing those things. And I think this should give us a real pause about what actually causes people to want to exert effort. What are the forces of motivation? So what do you think gets people so motivated to climb mountains or do other difficult things?
Challenge.
A challenge. Okay, so we want something difficult, right? It's a really different concept of utility, which means I want to be miserable, in some sense. What else? Why else do people? Yeah.
Sense of purpose, return of particular work environment, sense of autonomy, taking things.
Okay. Purpose, autonomy, achievement. Right. What else?
So you can tell other people what you did?
You can tell other people, right? So you want like utility for memory. You can, after the fact, remember what you've done and maybe tell other people. What else?
You might have a bad memory of how miserable it was last time.
You might again?
You might not remember very well how miserable.
Okay, so you might forget. Maybe it's like what women said about giving birth. You give birth, you forget how it was, so you go ahead and do it again. What else?
Hobby. Your interest. So if you have hobby,
It's a hobby, but,
Yeah.
but hobby doesn't explain it. You just say the same thing. What does it mean to have a hobby? What does it mean? It's part of your definition of yourself.
I mean,
A sense of purpose. It's what is it?
I mean your interest basically.
Okay, so it's just saying you're interested in something for its own sake.
Adventurous.
Adventurous. I think conquering something is really important. Like if a mountain had no peak, right, it wouldn't be the same. Or if you knew that you would climb but you would never reach the peak, it wouldn't feel the same. So there's all of these factors are there. And what's interesting is that if you think about it, it really questions what are we working for? Right? Are we really just working for money? Or are we working for all of these other things, like purpose and motivation and challenge and conquest? And once you start thinking about all of those as motivation, all of a sudden the marginal tax rate is less important. Because it's just the one part of human motivation. So I'll tell you one story about motivating and demotivating people. So we did this experiment. Actually, I'll tell you the background story. The background story is that an ex-student of mine came to campus one day, and he told me that the following story. He said that he worked for an investment bank. He was very happy at his work, and he was preparing this document for a big merger. This was a big PowerPoint presentation that was going to be the main discussion point in this big merger. And he worked on it very hard. He stayed late every night. Consultants, bankers, they do lots of PowerPoint. That's basically what they do. He did it very well. Beautiful graphs, information displayed. He sent it to his boss. His boss said, "Nice work. The merger has been cancelled. But nice work." And what this guy, David, said was that he was incredibly devastated. Right? He said he enjoyed the work when he was doing it. His boss appreciated it, which means he would get a raise or promotion, whatever it is. But the fact that this project would never see the light of day got him to be incredibly demotivated. So, and that basically says that, again, his motivation was not just linked to how much money he would get and how well his boss appreciated. There was something else about it. It's like achieving something, doing something, feeling useful, a sense of purpose. So we decided to test this. And the way we tested it was with Lego Bionicles. So we got people to come to the lab and we asked them to build Bionicles. And we paid them in a diminishing rate. We paid people $3 for the first Bionicle, and $2.70 for the next, and $2.40 for the next, and so on, until at some point they decided not to get more Bionicles. And the way it worked is you came, I gave you the first Bionicle, you build it, I said, good, that's $3, do you want to build another one for $2.70? Yes, I gave you the next one, and so on and so forth, until you decided to stop building. This was the basic group. The second group, we call the Sisyphic condition. You remember the story of Sisyphus? Sisyphus was punished by the gods to push the same rock on the same hill. So he was pushing the rock up, and toward the end, almost there, the rock was rolling back, and he had to do the same thing. And you can see how demotivating it is, and how much it's demotivating compared to, for example, if it was a new hill every time. Right? There's something about the same hill over and over and over. Like, I don't know if it's fiction or real, but they're saying that in prison they get prisoners to dig holes and then fill the same holes and dig them again. Something about the useless repetition seemed to be particularly demotivating. So we got people to do this. In the second condition, you build the first bionicle. I said you want to build another one. I gave you the second one. And as you were building the second one, I would take the first one apart to pieces. I put the pieces back into the box. And if you wanted to build a third one, I would give it back to you. So there was a continuous loop of two bionicles that were just being assembled and disassembled. What happened? First of all, people build many fewer bionicles. And the second thing was that we correlated how much people loved Legos naturally and how many bionicles they built. Now, if you just looked at this, and you said, how much do people love Legos? And how many bionicles they build, what would you expect? A positive correlation. People who don't love Legos will not build as much, and people who love Legos will build more. And indeed, in the regular condition, the control condition, there was a very nice correlation. What was the correlation in the Sisyphic condition? It was basically zero. And what this tells me is that we were able to eliminate every piece of internal joy people had for building Legos. We took people who generally love Lego internally and we kind of crushed their motivation and enjoyment from that. The other thing we did was we did an experiment we called the consultant experiment. In this consultant experiment, we just described the conditions to people. We said, imagine two factories that are being built. One is working in the Sisyphic condition, one is working on this. What's the difference, you think, of how many bionicles we'll build in the two conditions? And people thought that on average the difference would be one bionicle. That the meaningful condition would do one more bionicle than the Sisyphic condition. In reality, the difference was 4 bionicles. So not only is this effect strong, but people seem to dramatically underestimate it. People don't understand how powerful a sense of meaning is at work. So, in July, I went to give a talk at a big software company in Seattle. And we scheduled for giving this talk in April. And a week before I got there, this talk was going to be for a group of engineers who've been working for 2 years in a separate building to create what they thought was the next best product for this software company. 2 years. The week before I got there, they met with the CEO of the software company. They call him Steve as a shortcut. And he canceled the project. And I met them a week later, and this was the most depressed group of engineers I've ever seen. And they basically said that they felt like they were part of this Lego experiment. Right? Here they were, working for 2 years, very hard on something, and a week before, somebody crushed it in front of their eyes. And I asked them, I said, what could the CEO have done? Let's say he had to eliminate the project. Let's say he had to cancel it. Is there a way in which he could have canceled the project but not have made you this depressed? And they came up with ideas. They said, what if he allowed them to present the project in front of the whole company? What if he allowed them to build a few demos and let them float around? What if he asked them to think about which parts of the hardware that they were designing could have been exported or used in other parts of the company? Now here's the thing. Every one of the ideas they came up with to keep some of their motivation alive would cost money and take time. And if the CEO thinks that the value of meaning is very small, he wouldn't invest that. Right? And I think this CEO was in that mode. From his mode, they were just like rats in a maze. They were working, not in the right direction. He changed the maze on them. Right? But we're not like that. This was an incredibly important sense. And by underestimating how important meaning is, I think he actually lost them. And the truth is, he did lose them. 2 weeks after that, the most innovative person in this group, the guy who basically led this group and invented lots of new things for this software company, left the company, which was a really sad event. I also asked them, I said, how many of you now come later to work than you used to? And everybody raised their hands. And I said, how many of you go home earlier than you used to? And everybody raised their hands. And I said, how many of you fudge your expense reports? And nobody raised their hands, but they took me to dinner and they showed me what they know how to do. But the important thing here is that I think we have this sense, we have this incredibly naive sense of what motivates people, which is basically it's just about money. And if you want to get people to work, you just need to pay them, and it's just about bonuses, and as long as you can align the incentive, everything will be right. I think people are actually capable of a much broader, more interesting set of motivations. And we need to think about this broad set of motivation, not just a few of them, and not just money. So we've done all kinds of other things on incentives. But I do actually just want to say one more thing, that the thing that puzzled me most about incentives is this idea of bonuses. So I wrote all kinds of things about bonuses, but in the last 3 years I've been going from company to company that give bonuses and ask them whether they're willing to do some experiments with me. And of course nobody's willing to do experiments with bonuses. And then I said, can we at least do some surveys to see how happy people are at bonus season and what effect it has? And the answer I get 100% of the time is that bonus season is such a miserable time of the year that they're completely uninterested in doing any surveys. And I say, bonus season is so miserable, why do you do it? And they say, because everybody else is doing it. And why aren't you studying to figure out how to do it better? And actually nobody is willing to do it. So we have this amazingly skewed perspective that we think about salary and bonus as the one motivator. I think actually we need to have a very different look at what motivates people. Okay. Switching to a very different topic. I want to tell you that recently I became a fashion guru, as you can tell. So I'll tell you about how I became interested in fashion, which was a very strange thing for me. So I went to give a talk at a women's magazine called Harper's Bazaar. I'm sure some of you know that magazine. Anyway, I wasn't really sure why they wanted me there, but I was in New York. I was happy to show up. I met 100 of the best dressed women I've ever met. They were all sitting in the audience, unbelievable outfit. Everything could be like a piece in a museum. And they seemed to enjoy the general discussion. They asked some questions. And then at the end of my talk, Valerie, the publisher of the magazine, came on stage, gave me a kiss, and gave me a Prada bag. It's a big leather bag with a big Prada symbol on the side. Now everybody was really excited. Right now, something was going on finally. So here I was, walking around New York City with this big Prada bag, and I asked myself, what should I do with this big Prada symbol? Should I show it to the outside world so everybody could see that I'm walking around with a Prada bag? Or should I turn it around, have it against me, and it will be a secret? Just I will know and nobody else will have any clue that this big bag is actually a Prada bag. So I decided to have it against me. Nobody else knew what it was. And the strange sensation I had was that I was still walking with a Prada bag. It was really kind of a strange idea. And I passed by in Chinatown, and I saw these other people selling fake Prada bags, and I felt, better than them. I was with the real thing. And I never thought of myself as somebody who cares about fashion, so this was kind of a strange thing for me. And I thought, what would happen if I wore Ferrari underwear? What would happen to my behavior differently? If nobody else knew, but I knew, how would it? Because this was the metaphor. Nobody knew I had a Prada bag, and I still felt I had one. So we decided to do some experiments on this. So we gave people T-shirts that said the word generous or said the word stingy on them. And we send them to walk around campus for 2 hours, and we give them different tasks, so they have to go around and see all kinds of people. And then they come back to the lab, and we say, before you take off your shirt and we finish the experiment, there's another experiment here, would you mind participating? And they come to an experiment in which they have a chance to be either stingy or generous. Right? So what do you think happened to the people who have the word generous? Are they more generous? Yeah, and the people who have the word stingy, are they more stingy? Yeah. But what's interesting is that for half the people, the words stingy or generous were printed on the inside of the shirt. So when they wore it, they knew what they were wearing, but nobody else knew. What do you think happened to those people? It turns out they showed just the same behavior. Right, so when we think about fashion, we often think about external signaling. Right? The classical example is the peacock. The peacock has a huge, inefficient tail. They signal to the female that they are very virile, because if they can survive with this big tail, they must be really fantastic. And that's the notion of signaling. We buy very expensive things to show other people how good we are, how strong we are. That's also one of the theories in economics about advertising. It's called the theory of burning money, that you show people how strong you are, that you can waste money on advertising, and this basically indicates how much money you have to waste. So the theory is all about signaling to other people. But what about signaling to ourselves? Well, self-signaling. If we live in a world in which we don't know exactly who we are, and we're not sure about who we are, could it be that we could take some actions and all of a sudden feel differently about ourselves? Imagine you walk down the street and you see a beggar and you give them $1. Does that make you feel better about yourself? And you haven't become a better person. You were the same person that you were a moment ago. But, what? With $1 less. You're poorer, but you haven't become a better person. It didn't change your personality. But if you think about it, you have just done something that can prove to yourself that you are a really good person. You might be asking yourself, am I good? Am I bad? I don't know. Oh, look at me. I gave $1. I must be a good person. It could be that in the same way that we infer preferences of other people based on their behaviors, we also infer our own preferences based on our behavior. We see what we do, and that causes us to behave in a certain way. So, my next thought about this was that maybe this idea of self-signaling and the idea of signaling to others is the difference between buying fake and real products, counterfeits and real. Right? So if you have a real Prada bag, you know it and other people know it. If you have a counterfeit one, nobody else knows. Counterfeits are so good these days that nobody else would know. In fact, you can take counterfeit products. There's a range, but the good counterfeit products, you take them to the manufacturers and they have no idea that those are. So we thought maybe this is the difference between signaling to others and signaling to yourself. So we decided to do an experiment on this. So over the years, we've done lots of experiments on cheating. And some of you know some of those. But one of the things we find is the following. We find that if you give people a chance to cheat, many times chances to cheat, we find that they cheat a little bit for a while, and then lots of people switch and start cheating all the time. And we call this the what the hell effect. So you go around life and you say, oh, I want to cheat a little bit, but I want to think of myself as a good person. I want to cheat a little bit, I want to think of myself as a good person. All of a sudden you can't do that. You can't think of yourself as a good person. So what do you say? I might as well go all the way and at least benefit from that. Different people, by the way, switch in different points, but lots and lots of people have this switching point, right? Now, this is about our own understanding of ourselves. So we took a group of women, and we got a designer called Chloe to give us handbags. It's a British designer. Those of you who don't know, it's a good designer, right? Anybody here knows Chloe? Yeah? The women on campus were very excited. We had Chloe bags to give away. So we gave Chloe bags, and we told half of them they were real, and half of them that they were fake. And we asked them to walk around campus for a while. And then they came back and we gave them these tasks to see how they cheated. So what do you think? Would walking around with a fake bag get people to cheat any differently? What we found was that the point in which they cheated on average moved a little earlier. So the moment you wear something fake, you think of yourself as kind of a little dirty. Right? You're not as pure, you're not as wonderful, and you need less transgression to put you over the threshold and start cheating to a larger degree. It means it's about self-signaling. It's about the fact that what we wear tells us about who we are. And if you're wearing something fake, you think of yourself as a little dirtier, and therefore it's easier to move, to cheat more later. I'll tell you one more thing about fashion, and I'll tell you something about religion. There's a very interesting effect in psychology that I think you covered in class this year called the spotlight effect. And the spotlight effect was first demonstrated on undergrads with the help of Barry Manilow. So imagine you're a college undergrad, many of you are, and I give you a T-shirt with a big Barry Manilow picture, and I ask you to go into one of the fraternity or sorority parties. And you go in, and at the end of the party, I ask you, how many people notice your Barry Manilow T-shirt? What do you think you will say? You will say, everybody noticed and my social life is over. Right? There's no way to live socially acceptable life after this event. And then you would go into the fraternity and you would ask everybody in the party whether they saw your shirt. What do you think would happen? Almost nobody else has any idea. And that's called the spotlight effect. The idea is that we are very attentive to our own actions. We think of ourselves. We're the center of the universe from the way that we're concerned. Other people have other things to do, but we don't understand that. We think other people are as obsessed with us as we are, that they notice every small action, if our hair is correct or not. This, by the way, is what I think is fueling the fashion industry, right? Because if we truly understood how little attention other people pay us, how much money would you spend and how much attention would you spend to how we're dressed? Not that much. But the fact that we think that other people are obsessed with how we look and how we behave gets us to pay much more attention and much more money in the process. So we went back to our fake products. And we said, what difference would it make if we gave you a fake handbag or sunglasses to walk around campus versus a real one? What would it change in terms of the spotlight effect? So what do you think happens? What do you think? Would people think that they are more the focus of attention of other people if they were real or if they were fake? So much more when they were real. And there were two reasons for that. The first is that when people walk with fake stuff, they don't look in people's eyes as much. So you walk in with a real bag, you're kind of looking at everybody, trying to get nods back and appreciation from other people. You were fake, you just don't think, you don't try to look at other people. And on top of that, you underestimate how many people are looking. So it means that wearing a real bag compared to a fake one amplifies the spotlight effect. Now, should we pay for that? I'm not completely sure, but it gives people a sense that they are more in the eyes of other people. Religion. So going back to this cheating stuff. So we got to see that people cheat a lot at some point, switch to cheating a lot. And that made us think about the Catholic confession. Anybody here Catholic? Okay. This is no offense to Catholics in any way. Don't say, but so you start cheating a lot. Why would you ever stop? Could it be that confession could basically reset it? By the way, I don't know if you know it, but confession, it's a really interesting mechanism. It used to be that people could confess only once in their lifetime. You remember in the movie sometimes you see somebody trying to confess just before they die? That's what people used to do. They used to try and time the confession just before they die, because if you time it too early, you would have to be good between then and when you die. So the game was a timing game. It became very difficult to do, so they now allow people to confess multiple times. They also recently, has anybody here who's Catholic have been to confession recently? No. It also, it's also the case that recently they're moving confessions to be face-to-face without this screen. And the idea is to kind of increase the embarrassment a little bit. I'll tell you one confession joke. So an 82-year-old guy comes to confession, And he says to the priest, "Forgive me, Father, I've sinned. I just had sex with 2 young twins." And the priest said, "This is terrible. This is awful. Say, 72 Hail Marys and 52 something else." He said, "How long has it been since your last confession?" And the guy said, "Well, actually, I've never been to confession." I said, "You've never been to confession?" I said, "No, I've never been to confession. Actually, I'm Jewish." He said, "So if you're Jewish, why are you here and why are you telling me this?" So I'm telling everybody. So anyway, we thought about confession as a mechanism. And if you think about it from an economics perspective, it's a really strange mechanism. Right? If you can sin and get absolved, what would you do? You would sin more. In fact, you would sin on the way to confession. Right? That's the prescription. If you want to minimize your time in purgatory, the chance that you will die unconfessed, you just want to cheat before you get to confession. So we went to Italy to talk to real Catholics, to Catholic priests. And we tried to tell them to tell us what they think is the reason people confess. Where's this mechanism coming from? And there's some possibilities. One possibility is that we look forward to confession. I think, well, I'm going to rob this gas station, and not only do I have a chance of being caught, I'll have to talk to this priest. And this will add another unpleasantness. So I kind of look at the cost, I said, not worth it. Don't want to talk to this guy. Okay, that's one possibility. Another possibility is that you came out of confession and you feel pure and wonderful for at least a little bit, and you're trying to maintain that feeling so you're a little bit more honest for a little bit afterward. And you actually find evidence for this. But the most interesting version is that it stops the what the hell effect. That you keep on cheating and cheating and cheating and cheating, and at some point there's no way to stop, but confession gets you to demark that point. And then I'm opening a new page. And if you're opening a new page, you're back here. So we try this out. We allow people to cheat, they cheated a lot, and then we stop them. And we said, hey, by the way, there's a little sheet here if you want to write down things you regret doing in your life. Why don't you go ahead and do it, and after that, please shred the sheet of paper. And after that, we said, hey, by the way, some people ask forgiveness for what they do. If you want, here's a sheet of paper. You can ask forgiveness from whatever deity you believe in and shred the sheet of paper. And what happened? It turns out that you need both of those elements. But when you have both of those elements, one of them is not enough. Cheating goes down dramatically to the same initial level. Now, if you let them continue, they go up and cheating again later. But at least for a while, it seems to be effective. And as a social scientist, I find that very interesting. It's the idea that religion, and again, this is a non-religious person talking about religion, but it means that religions have evolved to deal with lots of our social problems. They don't deal with everything, like they don't deal with overeating and obesity, but they're dealing with lots of problems that we have as human beings, and maybe there are interesting hints in how religions work to tell us what mechanisms could actually work out. And maybe what we need to do is we need to create more confessions for people in Congress, for example, or for business executives. If you have been cheating for the last 8 quarters, why would you ever stop? If you've been cheating on your taxes for 3 years, why would you stop? Could it be that there's something wise about how these religions work that could teach us a lesson? The experiment we're doing right now, by the way, is comparing the Catholics to the Jews. So if you think about those two religions came out with different confession mechanisms. In Catholicism, it's up to the person who is confessing to decide when it's time to confess. For you, clearly, there's no need to confess. But when you feel like it, you can decide. In Judaism, it's once a year. It's not under your control as a sinner. Which one of those two religions got it better? Which one, if you had to pick a mechanism, which one is more effective? So that's one of the things we're looking at now. The last thing I want to tell you is an experiment that we are just finished on loss aversion. So if you remember, loss aversion is this principle in which people hate losing more than they enjoy gaining. Right? So you play, let's say I offered you a coin flip and I say you can win $130 or lose $100. How many people would take this coin flip? Not many, because we think that losing $100 would be more miserable than gaining 130 or 120, whatever your threshold is, but there's asymmetry. So we basically did the following thing. We asked people to become salesmen. People became insurance salesmen. And they could sell either insurance from company A, or they could sell insurance from company B. But what we did was that company A prepaid them all the commission in advance. So imagine you're representing these two companies. Company A prepaid you. You have 50 policies and they paid you all the commission in advance. And company B, they'll pay you every time you get the commission. So if I come to sell you A or B, if I sell you A, I get to keep the commission. If I sell you B, I have to give back the commission for that particular insurance policy. And what happened? People dramatically oversold insurance A. In fact, they sold insurance A even when it was financially inefficient for them or for their clients to do so. Right? People hate giving money back to such a degree that it's getting them to basically misbehave and do things wrong. The next step that we're taking this idea is to think about matching contribution. So the way 401k plans work is that your workplace is willing to match your contribution up to, let's say, 10%. So every month you put money and the company matches it. And then you put again money and the company matches it. And lots of people don't take full advantage of that. So the project we're trying to do now is we're trying to see how we can build loss aversion into this. So let me ask you, how would you build loss aversion into this? What would you do differently in a matching plan if you understood loss aversion?
Automatic enrollment.
Automatic enrollment for the max. That's not loss aversion, but that's obviously a good idea. What else?
Show people the money that's going in, or that would be going in.
Showing, I think that's the right thing, is showing the people the money that would have been going in. So what we're trying to do now is we're trying for the company to put all the money in the beginning of the year. So let's say that the max you can match is $12,000. They put in $12,000 in your account. And every month that you don't maximize, they take back their part. Now legally it's a little tricky. That's why it's complex to do. But the expectation, of course, is this would work much harder. Because if every month you would see money going away from your account, it's much more powerful and much more guttural and visceral and annoying. And we hope that this would get people to actually save more. That's basically what I want to say. I'm happy to take some questions, thoughts. Happy to talk about other things. Yeah.
Could you comment on how you think this field of behavioral economics, do you think that any of the findings that you have will help answer questions like for the equity premium puzzle or any of the other people here at ASU are studying in their model?
So the question is, would behavioral economics be helpful in any way, maybe to start with? And then would it help solve some specific puzzles in economics? So, I think that behavioral economics is really kind of a general name for applied social science. The truth is, economics is a wonderful study, right? People have lots of insights and interesting ideas. The mistake that economists are making is not that economics is wrong, is that it's not perfectly correct, but economists have the audacity from time to time to assume that it's perfectly correct. So imagine economists said, we have a model that describes 25% of the variance of behavior. You would say, wow, great, this is wonderful. I'm not going to do policies based on that yet, but it's wonderful to know that there's a model that can predict 25%. That would be very nice. But what economists are saying instead is we have a model that explains all the variance and you don't need to do anything else. And that's where things become a bit more dicey and a bit more dangerous. And I think that it's not about behavioral economics, it's about data. It's about the humility to say that we actually don't know. We're designing a taxation system, we're designing an incentive system for teachers, we're designing healthcare systems. The truth is we don't know. I mean, imagine you were going to take 19% of GDP in the healthcare program, and you're going to create something based on no evidence. It's really quite amazing, right? It's really quite amazing. Why don't we just admit how little we know and say, you know what? Let's just create a few variations, let them run for a couple of years and see what we can learn. It's about this confidence, this amazing confidence that we can create those systems that actually work well. So I think that's the big issue. The real big issue is not so much behavioral economics, but it's data and field experiments that would get us closer to doing better. In terms of the equity premium puzzle, I think there are multiple things going on, but I generally like the Thaler and Bernard's idea that loss aversion and the aversion to see large fluctuation causes people to buy bonds too much. And I think on top of that, these days, who would trust the stock market? Very hard.
But in that model, it would have to be so large, right?
What is?
The standard deviation.
Yeah, the standard deviation has to be large. So, I'm not sure that that's exactly the parameters, but I think it explains, and I'm not sure it explains everything, but I think it's a partial explanation for this. Yeah?
Did you ever think of any non-religious mechanisms to make you refer to what the hell?
Sorry?
Did you ever think of any non-religious mechanisms that can help refer to what
Yeah. So I think, I think religion is tapping something, but it's not just about religion. Mm-hmm. So many people report that if you're on a strict diet and then you eat a cookie, the day is gone, right? You might start tomorrow, you might start next Monday. And I think it's because we have a much easier time following rules than being kind of flexible about it. So imagine you were an alcoholic. And imagine you had a rule that you drink 1 glass a day. This will be incredibly difficult to keep. How big is the glass? And maybe you didn't do enough yesterday, so you can compensate. We would play all these games with ourselves and we end up drinking much, much more. But if you had a very strict rule that says no drinking, it's easy to keep. In fact, across all of things in life, if you have a very strict rule, it's much easier to keep than if you have a flexible rule. So I think the what the hell effect really comes from this idea that you have a rule, and once you've stepped out of it, you think of yourself as a bad person. I'll give you another religious example. You know about Calvinism? It's a really interesting religion, right? In Calvinism, you are born either good or bad. And you can't change it. And you're either going to heaven or you're going to hell. So why would you behave good or well according to Calvinism? Because you spend your whole life trying to prove to yourself that you're the good type. And if you behave once badly, you're saying, it must mean I'm a terrible person, I'm going to hell. And then you continue. So I think there is something about rules and how easy it is for us to obey rules and how difficult it is to obey things that change. That's why, for example, stopping smoking is much easier than to diet. You're a smoker or you're a non-smoker. You can't not eat. I mean, if we had a substitute for food that were like pills or something else, you could have a rule like this. But it's not. It's always the next forkful, yes or no, right? And those things really trap us. So I think it is about rules of behavior and the relative ease in which we have to keep them and the relative difficulty of making continuous trade-offs.
So do you think there would be any type of social scientific experiment that you can pull off to see if people have the self-discipline to do what they should do or not?
Well, I don't think we need an experiment. People have no self-discipline. I mean, we know.
I mean, is it possible?
So I think the evidence on self-discipline is that it doesn't. I mean, we're really bad at it. So I'll ask you. I mean, actually, let me ask everybody. How many of you here have eaten more in the last week than you hoped you would? Okay. How many have exercised less than you hoped you would? How many have procrastinated more than you thought you would? How many of you had more unprotected sex than you thought you would? Nobody. Wow, that's very good. So I think that the question of whether we have self-control is quite clearly no. What is interesting is that the commercial environment that is created around us is sapping our self-control to a higher and higher degree. Think about all the forces that want you to spend your money now. Give them your time. Give them your energy. Most of things are about now. Facebook. How many people here use Facebook more frequently than you wished you would? It's really quite amazing, right? Now, Facebook, what are successful features of Facebook? One that gets you to come back 17 times a day. A feature that gets you to come every third day is going to be eliminated from Facebook very quickly. So the commercial powers around us are forces that basically try to get us to do something now, quickly. And because of that, the challenges of self-control are just increasing all the time. There was this analysis that asked how many of the deaths, what percentage of the deaths 80 years ago were caused by human error? It was about 10%, bad decision making. How much of the deaths these days are caused by human error? It's about 50%. Obesity, texting while driving, I mean, you can just name it, right? We create lots and lots of ways, smoking, we create lots and lots of ways to kill ourselves. And all of them are about failures of self-control. So I think the big question is, what can we do? How do we fight that? Because right now we're just creating incentives for bad self-control. How do we change it and start creating mechanisms that help us fight it? Not easy. There are some, but not easy to do. Yeah?
Two questions. One, when you were looking at bonuses, was there a particular industry that you're looking at? And the second question is, have you done enough research to kind of identify or even rate what factors motivate people to work harder or longer?
Yeah, so bonuses. Let me just tell you quickly. We did this experiment in which we gave people different levels of bonuses. So we had one group of people that we said, hey, if you do well on those 6 tasks, we'll give you 1 day of wages. If you'll do half, we'll give you half, a third, 0, 0. A second group, we said, if you do well on those 6 tasks, we'll give you 2 weeks of salary. And a third group, we said, if you do well on these 6 tasks, we'll give you 5 months of salary. So imagine that we drew, this was the 1 day, 14 day, and 5 months. I don't remember how many days it is. What do you think happens to performance? Performance was the same for 1 day and for the 2 weeks, and it went down dramatically for the 5 months bonus. Now why? Because it turns out that money is a two-edged sword. You promise people lots and lots of money, they really want to succeed, but they're also incredibly stressed. Imagine you're going to a brain surgery tomorrow, and just before you're going to anesthesia, you get to meet the surgeon. And you have the opportunity to tell them if they do well, you'll give them $100,000. And if they don't do well, you already hired a hitman that is going to... How well will the surgery go, right? I mean, you'll have a surgeon that keeps on thinking about money and hitmen. You know, unlikely to work out well. What bonuses really do, if you stop and think about the logic of bonuses, the logic is, I want you to do something, but I know that you naturally don't want to do it. So I'm going to put a big pile of money, hopefully in the general direction that I want you to behave, but never perfectly so. And by focusing very, very hard on this money, you will do something else correctly. It's really very strange. It turns out that when we deal with very simple mechanical tasks, laying bricks, jumping, stuff that we have control over, more money means more output. Right? Because if I paid you to jump, and I paid you lots of money, you would jump for a while. I paid you little, you will jump less. But when it's about creativity and thoughtfulness and concentration, it has this other effect where more money can actually become a distraction. And now we've looked at it with, students and non-students. We haven't been able to check bankers. There's some interesting results from sports that looks at people who perform in sport and the same choking under pressure that happens. So, for example, people who play golf with Tiger Woods perform worse than if they don't play with him. There's a kind of a Tiger Woods pressure. I mean, this is, now I'm not sure what happens, but before, when he was better, there was this effect. So that's the first thing. I think it's a very general issue. What was the second question?
Have you had enough research on ranking work size? What motivates people to work more?
Oh, what? So I don't know. So I think there's lots of motivation. It's about meaning, and it's about completion, it's about mastery, it's about feeling that you're contributing to your group. I mean, there's lots of things like it. What I should say is that I think we can replace many of those motivations with money. So we all have a tremendous capacity to care about our egos. How do we view ourselves and how other people view us? And we could do it by all kinds of means, including money. I can decide that all my worth is captured by my salary. And if you publish the Forbes 500 or 5,000 list, I would really care deeply about where I fall into. Now, is this what I'm capable of carrying? Or is just what I'm carrying because that's what you measure? I think it's the second rather than the first. So you ask whether people on Wall Street inherently care just about money, or have we taught them to care about just about money? I think it's the second more than the first. Yeah?
Why does a corporation want to increase the amount of contributions that they give to their employees?
Yeah. So there's a question, why would a corporation ever want to give their employees more money in terms of saving rates? And the logic is that when people have dramatic shifts in income, and they get the work suffer tremendously. So if you have bumps in income and you get to a lull point, chances are it will be very bad for you and for the company you work for, because you'll not do very well. Part of it is about peace of mind. So the idea is that you actually get people not to worry about their retirement, and you get them to not suffer when bad things happen. So when you contribute money in 401k, it's not just for retirement. You can also use it when other bad things happen in life. So that's the logic. Yeah. And by the way, it was more so when people stayed in the company for a long time. And there's still lots of companies like that, and then they care more. Yeah.
In finance, some of the issues run into 401ks. They're so poorly managed, or
yes.
the fees are so high that it's actually not worth it for the individual to save by 401k and put through themselves. So you as an individual will be more effective. A giant red button on the wall, every time you push it, save $50 for you. Or the loss aversion of taking your entire paycheck, put it in a savings account, and every time you want to spend it, you have to go take the money out and then go do something
yeah.
with it.
So the question here is the hidden fees in 401ks.
Right. So it's more effective to use a GUI that fundamentally defines the interface for
yeah.
loss aversion.
So the situation with 401k is terrible. It really is very sad. They have so many hidden fees, it's really hard to figure it out, and they charge a tremendous amount of money, and you don't see it. The solution, of course, is to use Vanguard, which have very low fees, and they're straightforward about it, they're non-for-profit, and they're much nicer about it. But so I think I like 401k because I both like the matching and I like automatic deductions. I think that if you have to rely on people's decision every time, it will be really, really hard. So we're working now with the World Bank to try and get people who are in the what's called the informal sector. These are people who work outside of the tax system. Mostly we're doing stuff in Africa. We started to do stuff in Africa, but these are people who have fruit stand or farmers, right? They have no banks, they're not connected to anything, and the question is, how do you get them to save? And the big challenge there is that you have to get them to save every time. They can't just fill a form once and it carries out forward. I'll tell you one last thing about saving, which I'm very interested in these days. So, the big challenge with savings is that we don't know how long we would live. So imagine you were going to live somewhere between 65 to 100, uniform distribution, and you need $100,000 a year to live. How much do you need to save? It's somewhere between 0 and 3.5 million. But you don't know in this range how much it is. Now, to feel fully comfortable, you would want to save 3.5 million. Really, really hard to do. Now, this is if you need to be self-insured, if you need to cover all possible consequences. That's why we have insurance in general, and that's what we have annuities. Right? Annuities when you give a bank or a mutual company a big chunk of money, and they pay you a salary for the rest of your life, hoping that you will die sooner rather than later. It turns out that mutual companies charge a lot of money for this risk, and it's a very inefficient strategy. So what do? There was a really interesting mechanism in Napoleon's time in France called tantines. Anybody here? Do you know tantines? No. So tantines was the following system. The 5 of us would get together, we would each put $100,000 down, the last person alive will get all the money. Now, this had two problems. The first one is, if you're the last person alive, you don't need all the money. Right? The second thing is what? People killed each other. Right? So tantines became illegal. But if you think about it, tantine is a really appealing mechanism. Because here is what happens. if you looked at mortality, let's say this is 65 years old and this is 100, mortality rate looks something like this. If you get an annuity, you get some kind of fixed amount of money, or if we had a cumulative, you will get a fixed amount of money. If you have a canteen, and how a canteen works, in this case, you have 1,000 people, every time somebody dies, their share is distributed around everybody else who's alive. How will that look like? In the beginning, you would get very little money, and then it will be the inverse of this thing. So if you live long, you'll really be rich. If you have, and that's actually good, because you have more likely have higher health expenses and all kinds of other things. The other nice thing about the canteen is that there's no risk. So the risk premium in annuity is very, very high. In canteen, there's no risk annuity. If you manage a canteen, everybody gives you the money, and then when everybody dies, you distribute their share. You're not really taking any risk. It's a really wonderful mechanism. So right now, we're trying to investigate canteens. We're trying to see whether we can make them legal, under what conditions, and how can we get people to contribute to those mechanisms. And if we do, I think it will be a really nice solution, because you can save much less and secure your retirement. The truth is that if we actually wanted everybody to have full retirement, it's just not going to happen. Right? It's just not a realistic goal to think that we could work for 30 years or 40 years and live for 40 years afterward and have a fully funded retirement. So we have to think about some insurance mechanisms. Social Security was one of them. We need to come up with another version. Canteen is one. Yeah.
How do differences in beliefs about the efficiency of public institutions affect total taxes? Between countries, let's say.
Between countries.
So if people in the United States think that donations are a more efficient system to help out the needy public institutions.
Yeah, so I don't know how it's... I don't know, for example, so the Swedish are very happy and they're paying lots of taxes. I'm not sure they think of their government as being more efficient than the American government. This is completely unsupported. For me, I didn't grow up in this country, but for me, the American attitude to taxes is very baffling. Right? This hatred of taxes is quite baffling. Taxes have done a lot for this country. They've helped us kind of struggle out of this recession. We've built universities. We fund research. There's not a single drug that has come up that has not been funded on taxpayers' money. The amount of things that our taxpayers are contributing because we have such a big tax base is really quite incredible. It's the countries where economies of scale is the most efficient in the world for the value of taxes. If you have a small country, you can't do that much. If you have a big country, your tax bases allow you to do lots of stuff, like research, like NASA. So I find the American ideology very strange. And one speculation, which people write me about all the time, is that the U.S. was founded against taxes. Right? That it's kind of in the basic history books. That, there was all these taxes, and they were fighting the taxes from the French, and that basically the British, and then that created the country. I don't know if that's kind of the mother's milk is in some sense anti-taxes, and that's the reason. I'm not sure what it is, but I think it's really quite interesting.
Does that explain the idea? Because you're saying U.S. has higher rates of private donation than other countries?
Higher rates of?
Donations?
By unbelievably far. It's just not even comparable how much Americans give to charity in other countries. It's tax deductible, that's part of it, but you're still giving up money. Even if it's tax deductible, you're giving 70 cents on the dollar. Even if you discount it by tax deduction.
You're willing to pay all that.
So I don't know. I think it's a really good mystery to try and understand this. Actually, let me say one last thing. One other mystery that we're working on right now is why people are stopping to immunize their kids. This is really sad, because we're this close to eradicating polio, and then there's some Birkenstock wearing, Whole Foods buying people who are not probably some of your parents who are stopping to immunize their kids. And polio, for example, in the U.S. is back. And this is really a deep problem. And the question is, how do we understand these smart, sophisticated people who are basically doing this awful thing for their kids and for society? And how do we figure it out, and how do we stop it? So we have some ideas of how to do it, but a really, really important problem. Sorry, somebody had a question.
Oh.
Yes.
In that experiment over there where you pay people more money and they do, I'm assuming that's a kind of short-term kind of experiment. I don't know the details.
Yeah, it's short-term.
Do you think it's appropriate to extrapolate that onto like salaries or long-term things like a person's whole career?
So if I can elaborate on your question, the question is if we offer people $1 million in bonus, they might spend lots of hours practicing, not just doing their work. They might spend lots of time practicing. So if I paid you lots of money to play basketball well, in a year from now, you might spend your whole year practicing. So I think big salaries and big bonuses can motivate people to put more effort, more time. I don't think it can make people better, necessarily. So you have to think about the relationship between putting more time and actually being better. And on Wall Street, for example, it's completely unclear to me how spending more hours as a trader would in any way make you a better trader. Right? So I think you have to ask about this. But if it's something where you can acquire skill very slowly over time, you can motivate part of that, and then it will mitigate some of the effect. But you could still say, let me motivate the learning and not so much the bonus at the end. Why not just motivate that directly? Why do it indirectly? Yeah?
After hearing what you said about the fashion, I'm just curious about your shoes and socks.
My shoes. My shoes, I have a theory that if I like to be comfortable, and I go all the time to corporate companies, and if I have nice, so these shoes have the color of my book, and it says irrational on the side, and because of that, I feel I can wear them anywhere. I can go to the World Economic Forum and I can wear these shoes. I don't need to have uncomfortable leather shoes. I usually also wear an Indian shirt. And the logic for that is nobody who's politically correct can say that this is being underdressed. Right? It's a different country. You will offend the whole subcontinent if you'll say something bad about it. So that's my strategy. The only place this strategy has not worked for me, by the way, is the White House. I came dressed this way and they wouldn't let me in. I still don't own a suitcase. Yeah.
Have you done any research into what would happen if you introduced material benefits to, say, open source software or charitable volunteers? You introduce material boards?
Yeah. So the question here is, what happens if you take something like open source software, you take volunteers and you introduce financial reward? And we haven't done that experiment, which I think is very interesting, but the experiments that we have done on that basically show that it's usually a very bad strategy. That people are willing to do lots of things for the goodness of their heart, but if you start paying them for that, now the rules of the game change. And the intuition is the following. So we've been together for an hour and 15 minutes. Imagine I ask you for a favor. So would you help me carry my suitcase, do something? Think about what's the odds that you would do it. And what would happen if I say, would you help me carry my suitcase? I'll give you $1.50. How would you react? Would you say to yourself, gee, I get to help Dan plus I get $1.50? Not really. You would say, oh, now it's work. I don't work for $1.50. Give me 100, we'll talk. So when you introduce high incentives, you can get people to behave in all kinds of ways. When you introduce small incentives, it can often backfire. And particularly the places we worry about this is the education system. Right, so we just finished a report for the National Academy of Sciences on the No Child Left Behind policy. What do? You exactly do that. You give teachers a very small amount of incentives that depends on their kids' grades. They get tiny amounts of money, paid more, and I think vastly it is demotivating teachers rather than helping them. Okay. So thank you very much for your time. Attention.